Madison doesn't have a law license, Alex. She has an MBA from Northwestern. She understands process optimization better than most lawyers here. My name is Tom Reynolds, and I was staring across the mahogany desk at Walter Brennan's 29-year-old son, watching him destroy 40 years of legal reputation with iPhone-level attention span. The Caldwell Defense Systems acquisition document sat in my briefcase, $15 million and 4 months of federal compliance work that would apparently be handed over to someone who thought ITAR was a social media platform. Alex, defense contractors aren't McDonald's franchises. You can't optimize national security compliance. He looked up from his tablet, finally giving me his full attention. For the first time since he'd called me into his corner office, I saw something beyond casual arrogance, genuine frustration mixed with the kind of certainty that only comes from never being wrong about anything important. That's exactly the problem, Tom. You've got this whole process that nobody else understands. Personal relationships that bypass our systems entirely. Dad's partners all do the same thing. These little kingdoms that make the firm impossible to scale. At 48, I'd survived 20 years of military service, 12 years at Brennan Legal, and 3 years of raising my son alone after losing Sarah to cancer. But nothing had prepared me for this conversation. Watching someone half my age explain why my expertise was obsolete. Those relationships took 12 years to build. You can't just systematize trust. But that's what's killing us. Alex leaned forward, animated now. Look, we're bleeding clients to firms that actually get it. AI, automation, data analytics. We're still doing business like it's 1995 while our competitors are evolving. He wasn't entirely wrong. Brennan Legal was behind on technology, still printing emails and using decade-old software. But federal defense work wasn't about efficiency metrics. It was about precision, relationships, and understanding that mistakes could compromise national security. Alex slid a termination packet across his desk. We're restructuring. Team-based model, standardized processes. Madison understands systems in ways traditional lawyers don't. You're firing me to put your girlfriend in charge of classified defense contracts. His face flushed red. This isn't about Madison. It's about building a sustainable business model that doesn't depend on aging prima donnas who think they're irreplaceable. The words stung because there was truth in them. I was protective of my client relationships, maybe possessive. I'd resisted attempts to systematize my practice, preferring personal contact to automated processes. But watching Alex's thumb swipe across his phone screen while discussing national security compliance, I realized something. He wasn't evil. He was catastrophically naive. And that might be worse. 1 hour to clean out your office, he said, already turning back to his tablet. The drive home through Houston traffic gave me 20 minutes to process what had just happened. 12 years of building expertise, relationships, reputation, reduced to a process optimization problem by someone who'd never filed a federal compliance report in his life. Kyle was home from school when I arrived, sprawled across the kitchen table with calculus homework. At 16, he had his mother's intuition and my stubborn streak, a combination that made him impossible to fool. He was wearing Sarah's old University of Texas Law School t-shirt, faded and 2 sizes too big. Dad, you're home early. He looked up from his textbook, immediately reading my expression. Oh shit, what happened? Language. And I got laid off today. Kyle closed his calculus book with deliberate precision. Because of that Alex guy you've been complaining about? Among other things. Dad, you literally know more about defense law than anyone in Houston. This is bullshit. He caught himself. Sorry, but it is. I sat down across from him, noticing how the late afternoon light caught the gold in his hair, exactly like Sarah's had been. Want to hear the whole story? I found myself explaining everything. Alex's innovation push, Madison's promotion, the federal compliance issues that kept me awake at night. Kyle listened without interrupting, processing it with the kind of analytical thinking that reminded me how much he'd grown up since losing his mother. So he's not completely wrong about the technology stuff, Kyle said finally. Your firm does sound pretty old school, but he's an idiot for firing you. Thanks for the support. I mean it, Dad. You're the one who actually knows how to do the work, right? Kyle grinned, then grew serious. What are you going to do? About money and stuff? My phone buzzed. Text from Patricia Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Defense Systems. Tom, the new lawyer just asked me what DFARS means. Please tell me this is a joke. I showed Kyle the message. That's bad, right? DFARS is Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. It's like a surgeon asking what a scalpel is. Kyle stared at the phone. Dude, they're screwed. Yeah, they are. So what are you going to do? I looked at my son, the kid who'd been through enough loss and uncertainty for one lifetime. I could find another job, keep my head down, avoid the drama, or I could prove to Alex and myself that experience still mattered in a world increasingly convinced it didn't. I'm going to help my friends, I said, and see what happens. Kyle nodded slowly. Mom always said you couldn't save everyone, but you had to try to save the ones you could. The coffee shop was neutral ground 2 days later, full of medical residents from the nearby hospital grabbing caffeine between shifts. Patricia Caldwell arrived 10 minutes late, looking like she'd been arguing with someone for the better part of an hour. Probably Madison, trying to explain why a $15 million defense acquisition needed actual defense attorneys. They fired you, she said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. Not a question. Budget cuts, restructuring, cultural alignment issues. Patricia had been running defense contractors for 20 years. She'd built her grandfather's machine shop into a major Pentagon supplier. She knew corporate speak when she heard it. Tom cut the diplomatic crap. What really happened? I chose my words carefully. New leadership wanted fresh perspectives. Thought traditional approaches were holding the firm back. Fresh perspectives. Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tom, my grandfather built tanks for Patton. My father designed radar systems for the Navy. I make defense software that keeps soldiers alive. When some MBA tells me compliance is just paperwork, I see my family rolling in their graves. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. I've got a $15 million deal closing Thursday. The woman they assigned to replace you just asked me if we need export licenses for domestic sales. Domestic sales, Tom? For dual-use technology components. My chest tightened. Caldwell's acquisition involved components that could be used in civilian applications but had clear military applications. The kind of thing that attracted federal scrutiny and could land executives in prison if handled incorrectly. I can't advise you on this, Patricia. Legal restrictions. I'm not asking for advice. I'm telling a friend that I'm scared. She pulled out her phone. This isn't just about one deal. If Brennan screws this up, it kills my relationship with the Pentagon. 20 years of building trust, gone. This was where principle met pragmatism. I could stay completely clean, maintain perfect ethics, and watch Patricia's company get destroyed by incompetence. Or I could bend the rules slightly to help a friend. Patricia, you need competent defense counsel. Rick Torres runs a solid practice. Torres and Associates. They understand compliance inside and out. Rick Torres, the JAG guy? Former colonel. Prosecuted war crimes in Kosovo. He knows the difference between following orders and following conscience. Patricia nodded, making notes. Anyone else I should know about? Torres would be my first choice. But Patricia, whatever you do, document everything. Every filing, every deadline, every communication. Trust me on this. Walking to my car, I felt the weight of compromise. I'd crossed a line. Subtle, defensible, but real. The old Tom Reynolds wouldn't have made referrals that served his own interests. Then again, the old Tom Reynolds had trusted Alex Brennan's judgment. Kyle found me in the garage that evening, pretending to organize tools while actually questioning every decision I'd made in the last 48 hours. I was holding Sarah's old socket wrench set, the one she'd insisted on buying when we moved into the house. You look like someone who's having second thoughts, he said, perching on my workbench. About what? About whether you're doing the right thing. Kyle picked up one of Sarah's wrenches, turning it over in his hands. Dad, I found some of Mom's case notes in your desk. She wrote something about making sure clients understand the emotional cost, not just the financial one. I took the wrench from him, remembering Sarah working late into the night, always thinking about the human impact of legal decisions. Alex wasn't completely wrong, you know, about the firm needing to change, about some of us being set in our ways. But he was wrong about firing you. Maybe, or maybe I was too stubborn to adapt. I set down the wrench carefully. Your mom always said the hardest part of being right was staying humble about it. Kyle was quiet for a moment. She also said the hardest part of being wrong was admitting it without giving up on yourself. Sarah's wisdom filtered through our son's perspective. The woman who taught me that integrity wasn't about being perfect. It was about owning your choices and learning from them. So what do you think I should do? Help your friends, but don't pretend it's just about helping them. Kyle looked directly at me, suddenly sounding older than 16. I know you want to get back at Alex. Mom always said holding grudges was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. But sometimes you have to fight back, right? I looked at my son, wondering when he'd gotten so wise. You think I'm being vindictive? I think you're being human. And Dad, you taught me that doing the right thing sucks sometimes. But you do it anyway. Rick Torres called Wednesday morning. His voice carried the weight of 20 years in the JAG Corps and the kind of directness that cut through bullshit like a laser. Tom, I've had 6 companies call asking about defense compliance work. All former Brennan clients. All mentioning your name specifically. Just making referrals to competent counsel. Cut the crap. I prosecuted war crimes for 3 years. I know what coordinated action looks like. Rick paused. Tom, I also know what justice looks like. What are you really doing here? I'm helping friends who are about to get screwed by incompetence. And getting some payback in the process? Maybe. Good. Alex Brennan's Boy Scout routine was always bullshit, but be careful. There's a difference between helping clients find good representation and orchestrating a mass exodus. What's that supposed to mean? It means Patricia Caldwell didn't just call asking about compliance services. She called asking specifically for you. So did Marcus Webb and Susan Rodriguez. They want to hire Torres and Associates, but only if you're handling their work. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This was escalating beyond what I'd intended. Rick, I can't practice defense law for 18 months. Non-compete. Independent consultant. Not an employee, not a partner. You work on specific matters. We provide infrastructure and legal cover. Rick's voice turned serious. But Tom, when this blows up, and it will blow up, you're going to need every bit of legal protection we can provide. That afternoon, I sat in my kitchen staring at Rick's offer letter. 40% of billings was steep, but it was 40% of something versus 100% of nothing. More importantly, it was a chance to do the work I'd spent 12 years perfecting, helping clients who'd trusted me long enough to follow me into uncertainty. Kyle came home from football practice, sweaty and exhausted, but grinning. His shoulder pads made him look bigger, more like the man he was becoming. Coach says I might start varsity next year if I put on 15 pounds. He grabbed a protein shake from the fridge, then sat down across from me. You make a decision about the consulting thing? Still thinking. Kyle studied my face with the same intensity Sarah used to bring to cross-examining witnesses. Dad, can I ask you something? About Mom, of course. When she was sick and the treatments weren't working, did she ever think about just giving up? Taking the easier path? The question caught me off guard. Sarah had fought her cancer with everything she had, right until the end. But there had been moments, private moments between us, when she'd wondered if the fight was worth it. Sometimes. Why? Because you've got 2 choices here, right? Take the easy path and find a regular job somewhere else, or fight for what you think is right, even if it gets messy. And you think I should fight? Kyle shrugged, but his eyes were serious. I think Mom would want you to be honest about what you're really doing and why. If you're doing this for revenge, own it. If you're doing it to help people, own that too. But don't lie to yourself about your motivations. That evening, I called Rick Torres. I'm in, but Rick, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about helping clients. Part of this is personal. I figured. Tom, the best revenge is living well. Let's make sure you do both. The first sign that I'd unleashed something beyond my control came from Marcus Webb on a Friday afternoon. His voice carried the controlled panic of a Marine Corps officer facing an impossible mission. Tom, we've got a problem. I followed your advice, hired Torres and Associates to review our compliance protocols. We found issues, serious ones, in work Brennan Legal did for us last year. What kind of issues? Export licensing violations. The kind that get executives investigated by federal agencies. Marcus paused. Tom, I've seen good officers relieved for less than this. Brennan's boy's going to get people killed with his innovation bullshit. Marines don't innovate with enemy fire incoming, we execute. My stomach dropped. I'd expected to find routine errors, missed deadlines, sloppy paperwork. Not potential criminal violations. Marcus, you need to report this immediately. Self-disclosure, full cooperation with regulators. Already started the process. But Tom, if we found this in one client file, how many others are there? That question kept me awake that night. I'd started this thinking I was helping friends avoid future problems. I hadn't considered that Madison's incompetence might have already created legal disasters. Kyle found me at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, reviewing federal export regulations on my laptop. I was surrounded by Sarah's old case files. Somehow I'd unconsciously pulled them out, looking for guidance from someone who wasn't there to give it. Dad, everything okay? Just working. He sat down across from me, still wearing his pajamas. In the harsh kitchen light, he looked younger than 16, more like the scared kid he'd been when Sarah first got sick. Want to talk about it? I found myself explaining the situation, the export violations Marcus had discovered, the potential federal investigation, the possibility that my actions had unleashed something much bigger than personal revenge. "So you're worried you might have started something you can't control," Kyle said. Something like that. Kyle picked up one of Sarah's old legal pads, covered in her careful handwriting. "Mom used to say that doing the right thing was like pulling a thread on a sweater. Once you started, you couldn't control where it would lead." What did she think about that? "She said you pull the thread anyway because pretending the sweater isn't unraveling doesn't make it any stronger." Over the next 2 weeks, the cascade accelerated. 3 more former Brennan clients discovered compliance violations in their files. Patricia Caldwell was meeting with State Department investigators. The Houston Chronicle started running stories about systematic failures in defense industry legal services. But it was the call from Susan Rodriguez that made me realize how deep this went. "Tom, I need to tell you something." Susan's voice was tight with stress. "I've been reviewing our Pentagon contracts going back 3 years. Brennan Legal missed critical compliance deadlines on 17 different occasions. We're talking about violations that could trigger congressional hearings." Susan Rodriguez ran aerospace holdings with the precision of someone who'd learned early that mistakes in the defense industry could cost lives. She'd started as an engineer, worked her way up through the ranks, and had zero tolerance for incompetence. How bad is it? Bad enough that I'm hiring outside counsel to represent us in what's probably going to be a federal investigation. Bad enough that I'm calling every CEO in my network to warn them about Brennan Legal. "Susan, be careful about what?" "Telling the truth." "Tom, these aren't just business mistakes. When defense contractors screw up compliance, soldiers die. Equipment fails. Missions get compromised." Her voice cracked slightly. "My son's deployed right now. When I think about some MBA playing games with national security compliance, I see his face." That night, Rick Torres called an emergency meeting at his office. "Tom, we need to talk about liability exposure. The State Department has opened a formal investigation into compliance violations in defense industry legal services. They're requesting all communications between former Brennan employees and defense contractors. That includes you." Janet Walsh, our litigation partner, spread files across the conference table. She was in her 50s, had prosecuted white-collar crime for 15 years before moving to private practice, and had the kind of skeptical intelligence that made her excellent at anticipating government action. The Justice Department is building a case around systematic violations of federal export controls. They're looking at criminal charges for anyone who knowingly facilitated these violations. I stared at the federal subpoena with my name on it, requesting all documents, communications, and records related to compliance violations in defense industry legal services. What does this mean for me? It means you're not just a witness anymore. You're a potential subject of investigation. Janet's expression was grim. "Tom, I've prosecuted defense contractors for 20 years. When someone with your experience walks away and clients start hemorrhaging, that tells a story. The question is, what story are the prosecutors going to decide to tell?" That night, Kyle and I sat on the back porch, looking at stars and avoiding the elephant in the room. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of the jasmine Sarah had planted 3 years before she died. "How bad is this, Dad?" "I don't know. Maybe not bad at all. Maybe very bad." "Are you scared?" The honest answer was yes. I was scared of federal prosecution, of losing my law license, of going to prison and leaving Kyle alone. But I was also scared of what would have happened if I'd done nothing, if I'd let Madison's incompetence endanger national security while I stayed safely silent. Yeah, I'm scared. But Kyle, sometimes being scared means you're doing something important. What would Mom say? I thought about Sarah facing her cancer diagnosis with determination and fear in equal measure. She'd been terrified, but she'd fought anyway because that's what you did when something mattered. She'd say we deal with whatever comes, together. Kyle reached over and squeezed my hand, something he hadn't done since he was 12. "Then that's what we'll do." Alex Brennan called me on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after he'd fired me. I almost didn't answer, but something in the way the phone kept ringing made me curious about his desperation level. "Tom, we need to talk." His voice was completely different now. Gone was the tech bro confidence, replaced by something that sounded like genuine panic mixed with exhaustion. "I don't think that's a good idea, Alex. Please, just 15 minutes. There are things you don't understand about what happened, about what's happening now." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, he looked like he'd aged 5 years in 6 weeks. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes or the way his hands shook slightly when he reached for his cup. "I fucked up," he said without preamble. "I know that now. But Tom, I wasn't trying to destroy the firm. I genuinely thought I was helping. by putting Madison in charge of federal compliance. I thought she could learn. I thought the work was mostly administrative, filing forms, tracking deadlines. I didn't understand how complex it really was. Alex looked directly at me for the first time. I didn't understand how dangerous it could be. For the first time since this started, I felt something like sympathy for Alex. Not enough to forgive him, but enough to recognize that he wasn't malicious, just catastrophically naive. Alex, defense contractors trust us with national security issues. There's no margin for error. I know that now, but nobody ever explained it to me that way. Dad retired and left me in charge, but he never taught me what the job actually involved. The partners all had their own little kingdoms, and nobody would share information with the boss's kid. Alex's voice carried genuine frustration now. Tom, I spent 2 years trying to get anyone, to explain how the firm actually worked. Everyone just said, trust the process, and went back to their offices. There was truth in that. Walter Brennan had been a distant father and an even more distant mentor. The firm's senior partners had treated Alex like an annoyance rather than a future leader, protecting their turf instead of teaching him the business. What do you want from me, Alex? I want to know how to fix this. The federal investigators are asking questions I can't answer. About compliance protocols, about client relationships, about work you did that I never bothered to understand. His voice cracked slightly. Tom, people could go to prison. Not just me, clients, staff members, anyone who touched these files. And it's my fault. I looked at this 29-year-old who'd inherited more responsibility than he could handle and made decisions that could destroy lives. The anger I'd been carrying started to shift into something more complicated. Alex, the best thing you can do now is cooperate fully with the investigation. Tell them everything. Don't try to minimize or excuse anything. Take responsibility. Will you help me? I can't. I'm a potential target myself. Because of what I did to you. Because of choices we both made. Alex stared into his coffee cup. Tom, I want you to know, I called every major firm in Houston trying to find someone to replace you. You know what they all said? I waited. They said they couldn't match your expertise. That defense compliance was too specialized, too risky, that they'd need at least 2 years to build the kind of relationships you had. Alex looked up at me. I fired the only person who could actually do the job because I was too proud to admit I needed help. The federal investigation moved with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that was both impressive and terrifying. Subpoenas, interviews, document requests that required teams of lawyers to process. My kitchen table became command central for organizing 12 years of client files, correspondence, and records. The Justice Department prosecutor was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of focused intensity that marked career federal attorneys. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen. The name was a coincidence that made me think of my wife every time I heard it. We met in a windowless conference room that smelled like industrial carpet and government coffee. 2 other prosecutors flanked her, along with investigators from the State Department and Defense Security Service. Mr. Reynolds, she began, spreading files across the table with careful precision. You worked at Brennan Legal for 12 years. During that time, were you aware of compliance violations in defense industry work? I was aware of concerns about the quality of compliance work under new management. Specifically, the firm assigned someone without proper qualifications to handle federal defense contracts. I expressed concerns about this decision to executive management. To whom specifically? To Alex Brennan, the executive who made the assignment. What was his response? He said fresh perspectives and process optimization were more important than traditional qualifications. Prosecutor Chen made notes in careful handwriting. Mr. Reynolds, after your termination, you made referrals that led to the discovery of multiple compliance violations. Did you suspect these specific violations existed? This was the critical moment. The truth that could implicate me or clear me, depending on how it was interpreted. I suspected that inexperienced counsel might create problems for clients. I recommended they seek competent review of their compliance status as a precautionary measure. I did not know about specific violations, but you suspected problems serious enough to recommend immediate review? Yes. In my experience, defense compliance requires specialized knowledge and constant attention to regulatory changes. I was concerned that inexperienced counsel might overlook critical requirements. And you benefited professionally when clients followed your recommendations? I was hired as a consultant by Torres and Associates, the firm several clients retained, yes. Mr. Reynolds, in your professional judgment, were these compliance violations preventable? I thought about Madison, struggling with regulations she didn't understand. About Alex, trying to innovate in areas where innovation could be deadly. About myself walking away from a situation I knew was dangerous. Yes, they were preventable. With proper supervision and qualified counsel, none of this would have happened. And why didn't that proper supervision exist? Because qualified counsel was terminated and replaced with unqualified personnel for reasons unrelated to competence or client service. Prosecutor Chen closed her file. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. We'll be in touch if we need additional information. As I walked to my car, I realized the investigation was far from over. The questions they'd asked suggested they were building a case around systemic negligence, possibly criminal charges for anyone who'd knowingly endangered national security. I was probably safe, but Alex Brennan was in serious trouble. The call came at 11:30 on a Thursday night, 3 months into the federal investigation. Kyle was asleep, and I was reviewing case files when my phone rang with an unknown number. Tom, it's Alex. His voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, exhausted, carrying the weight of someone who hadn't slept in days. Alex, you shouldn't be calling me. If the prosecutors find out, I don't care anymore. Tom, I need you to know something. Madison, she tried to kill herself yesterday. The words hit me like the physical blow. What? She's alive. In the hospital. But she left a note. She said she couldn't live with what she'd done to those companies, to their employees. She said she never understood what the compliance work really meant until the investigator started asking questions. I sat down heavily, feeling the weight of unintended consequences. In my focus on stopping Alex's incompetence, I'd never considered the human cost to Madison herself. Alex, I'm sorry. Is she okay? Physically, yes. Mentally, his voice broke. Tom, she's 26 years old. She has an MBA and thought she could learn anything. When I offered her the compliance work, she was excited about the challenge. She had no idea she was putting people's lives at risk. Alex, this isn't your fault alone. Yes, it is. I put her in an impossible situation because I was too arrogant to admit I didn't understand my own business. And now he couldn't finish the sentence. I thought about Kyle, about how young 26 suddenly seemed, about the difference between malicious incompetence and innocent ignorance. What can I do? Nothing. I wanted you to know. When this all comes out in court, people are going to think Madison was some kind of criminal. But she was just a kid who trusted me to know what I was doing. The line went quiet. Then Alex spoke again, his voice steadier now. Tom, I'm going to plead guilty to all of it. Criminal negligence, endangering national security, whatever they want to charge me with. I won't let Madison take the fall for my mistakes. Alex, you need to talk to your lawyer before making any decisions. I've talked to 3 lawyers. They all say the same thing. Cooperate fully, take responsibility, hope for mercy. But Tom, I want you to know something else. Your recommendations, the client reviews you triggered, they probably prevented something much worse from happening. What do you mean? The investigators found evidence that our compliance failures went back 18 months. If those contracts had proceeded without review, if Madison had kept making the same mistakes, the Pentagon estimates it could have compromised dozens of defense programs, billions of dollars in equipment, thousands of soldiers. I felt something cold settle in my chest. The magnitude of what we'd narrowly avoided. Alex, why are you telling me this? Because when this is over, when my name is ruined and I'm working at my uncle's car dealership, I want someone to remember that we almost screwed up something really important. And you stopped it. The congressional hearing was held on a gray morning in March, 6 months after Alex had fired me. I watched from the gallery as Alex Brennan, 29 years old and facing criminal charges, testified before the House Defense Appropriations Subcommittee about systematic failures in defense industry legal oversight. Mr. Brennan, the subcommittee chair began, your firm handled defense contracts worth over $2 billion in the past 3 years. Can you explain to this committee how an unlicensed paralegal came to be responsible for federal compliance oversight? Alex had aged visibly since our last conversation. His expensive suits had been replaced by a simple gray jacket, his confidence completely gone. But when he spoke, his voice was clear and steady. Chairman Williams, I made a series of catastrophic judgment errors based on my fundamental misunderstanding of the complexity and importance of defense compliance work. I terminated qualified counsel and replaced them with inexperienced personnel because I prioritized innovation over competence. Are you saying you knowingly endangered national security? No, sir. I'm saying I was too ignorant to understand that I was endangering national security. That ignorance doesn't excuse my actions, but it explains them. The questions continued for 3 hours. Alex answered everyone directly, taking full responsibility, refusing to shift blame to Madison or his father or anyone else. Watching him, I realized something had fundamentally changed in the young man who'd fired me with such casual arrogance. Kyle found me in the courthouse lobby afterward. "How'd you get here?" I asked. "Took the bus. Figured this was important." He studied my face. "How do you feel?" "Complicated." "Good complicated or bad complicated?" I thought about Alex, probably heading to federal prison. About Madison, still recovering from her suicide attempt. About the defense contractors who'd trusted the wrong people and nearly paid with their companies. Necessary, complicated. Kyle nodded. Mom would say that's the best kind. 6 weeks later, Alex Brennan pleaded guilty to criminal negligence in handling defense contracts. He received 2 years in federal prison and permanent disbarment from practicing law. Madison received immunity in exchange for cooperation and entered a psychiatric treatment program. Walter Brennan lost his life's work but avoided criminal charges. Brennan Legal was dissolved, its assets distributed to a victim compensation fund for affected clients. I stood in my new corner office at Torres and Associates, now a full partner with a practice built on the ashes of Brennan Legal. 23 former clients had followed me, along with 5 attorneys and 3 staff members who'd been caught in the crossfire of Alex's incompetence. The office had windows facing southeast, with a view of downtown Houston that included the empty building where Brennan Legal used to operate. A for-lease sign hung in the lobby where portraits of 3 generations of Brennan lawyers had once presided. Kyle knocked on my door. At 17, he'd grown into his frame and was looking at colleges. Pre-law programs, mostly. "Partnership meeting go okay?" he asked. They elected me managing partner. Kyle grinned. "Congratulations, Dad. Think Mom would be proud?" I thought about Sarah, about her belief that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the easy thing. About the principles she'd tried to teach both of us through her own example. I think she'd say we did what we had to do. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing case files when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Alex Brennan. I know I have no right to ask, but I wanted you to know that I understand now why you did what you did. I'm sorry for what I put you through, and I'm grateful that you helped prevent something much worse from happening. I hope your son is proud of his father. I hope someday I can be the kind of man who makes better choices." I stared at the message for a long time, then showed it to Kyle. "Are you going to respond?" "I don't know. What do you think?" Kyle read the message again, his expression thoughtful. "I think Mom would say that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you deciding what kind of person you want to be." That night I wrote back, "Alex, we all made choices. Some were better than others. Learn from this and do better next time. That's what second chances are for." His response came immediately, "Thank you. I won't waste it." The reckoning, I realized, wasn't just about justice or revenge or even redemption. It was about understanding that every choice creates consequences, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is own those consequences and learn to live with them. Sometimes that means fighting for what's right, even when it's messy and personal. Sometimes it means forgiving people who don't deserve it, because carrying anger is heavier than letting it go. And sometimes it means recognizing that the person you thought was your enemy was just a scared kid making terrible decisions under impossible pressure. But mostly, it means building something worth protecting and teaching the next generation why that matters. Kyle was looking at law schools now, asking questions about justice and ethics and the responsibility that comes with power. Sarah's questions filtered through our son's perspective. The best revenge I'd learned wasn't destroying your enemies. It was becoming the kind of person who didn't need enemies to define who you were. But more than that, it was showing your son that principles aren't just pretty words you put on motivational posters. They're the foundation you build a life on. Even when that foundation gets tested, it holds. 2 years later, I received an invitation to Alex Brennan's wedding. He was marrying a social worker he'd met in his community service program, someone who understood second chances and the weight of making amends. I didn't go, but I sent a card. Kyle did end up studying law, but he also kept his mother's legal pad with her handwritten reminder. Settlement terms. Make sure client understands emotional cost, not just financial. She taped it to his dorm room wall, right next to his acceptance letter to University of Texas Law School. Some foundations, once built right, last for generations.